So it's not like the BRICS have this huge power and the U.S. is gone, but it's easier to make those kind of headlines early on against countries like Mexico or Colombia. It gets very different when you go against the BRICS, and the BRICS will do just like the world did when we did the first tariffs in 1930 under Smoot-Hawley. The BRICS will be forced to de-dollarize faster. I mean, Russia said officially when they made that threat, you're just digging a grave for the U.S. dollar. You're going to accelerate de-dollarization. We're going to get more creative. We're going to do more with our new development bank and our contingent reserve arrangement. We're going to do more to find trade settlements outside of the dollar in gold-backed transactions, not gold-backed currencies, gold-backed transactions. We're going to do more to come up with creative trade arrangements outside of the U.S. dollar. So be careful who you throw that stick at when you're talking to us as a group.
According to experts, amid escalating tensions between the BRICS alliance and the West, China is reportedly preparing for a trade war with the United States. Former U.S. President Donald Trump has reiterated his intent to impose tariffs on the BRICS bloc, recently demanding a renewed commitment to the U.S. dollar as a condition to avoid these economic measures. Despite this, Trump has reaffirmed his commitment to implementing the tariffs, expected to take effect within the coming week. MatthewPiepenburg, advisor and partner at Matterhorn Asset Management AG, highlights that U.S. economic pressure on BRICS nations could accelerate their shift away from the dollar. In response, BRICS countries are increasingly adopting alternative trade arrangements, including gold-backed transactions and other financial mechanisms that reduce reliance on the U.S. currency. This move threatens to weaken the dollar's global influence over time. A significant step in this direction is the recent agreement between BRICS members India and Indonesia to abandon the U.S. dollar for cross-border transactions. Both nations have decided to settle trade using their local currencies despite Trump's threats to impose 100% import tariffs. Indonesia aims to promote its national currency for bilateral trade, while India has fully embraced this shift in economic policy. As BRICS nations deepen financial integration, trade in national currencies is central to their economic strategy. The move signals a growing trend among developing countries to reduce their dependence on the U.S. dollar, potentially reshaping global trade dynamics. Meanwhile, Trump has yet to respond to this policy shift, which sidelines the dollar in favor of local currencies. The escalating trade tensions extend beyond BRICS, as Trump recently announced a 25% tariff on Mexican goods, accusing President Claudia Sheinbaum's administration of fostering an intolerable alliance with criminal organizations. This move has further strained U.S.-Mexico relations, adding another layer to the broader economic standoff between Washington and emerging economies. Make sure to tune in for our expert analysis. Don't miss out on future content. Hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications to stay in the loop. Your support is greatly appreciated.
It's like when we were weaponizing the dollar, even Obama said don't weaponize the dollar in 2015, but he didn't mean that against countries like Iran or Venezuela. You can play that game with Iran and Venezuela. And frankly, you can play that game with Colombia, and you can play in terms of tariffs, and with all due respect, Canada is a major power, but Trump can threaten Mexico. It can threaten Canada. And by the way, Mexico will retaliate. Mexico will be creative. But the BRICS are different as a group than, say, Colombia or Mexico or even Canada individually. And that's the thing I think we're underestimating. Again, I say the BRICS are 35 to 40% of global GDP and rising. And by the way, the BRICS have lots of weaknesses. I'm not saying they don't have problems. There's a big difference between Russia and China and Brazil and India. They're not fully coalesced. The percentage of GDP is almost all in China's hands. That's the real power. So it's not like the BRICS have this huge power and the U.S. is gone. But it's easier to make those kind of headlines early on against countries like Mexico or Colombia. It gets very different when you go against the BRICS. And the BRICS will do just like the world did when we did the first tariffs in 1930 under Smoot-Hawley. The BRICS will be forced to de-dollarize faster. I mean, Russia said officially when they made that threat, you're just digging a grave for the U.S. dollar. You're going to accelerate de-dollarization. We're going to get more creative. We're going to do more with our new development bank and our contingent reserve arrangement. We're going to do more to find trade settlements outside of the dollar in gold-backed transactions. We're going to do more to come up with creative trade arrangements outside of the U.S. dollar. So be careful who you throw that stick at when you're talking to us as a group. And the question is, will they cooperate in a John Nash way, or will they fight in a Trump winner-take-all way? And that's the risk and that's the danger. But don't underestimate the BRICS, despite a lot of their weaknesses. I'm not saying they're monolithic. Yeah. And if Trump is going to do something like this is the time, because America is still the dollar is still 58% of FX reserves. We're still the strongest economy in the world. We're still the strongest military in the world. He's got 2 years before the midterm elections. He's got a House, he's got a White House, he's got a Senate, he's got a Supreme Court, he's got popularity. This is the last time to really carry that big stick, in my opinion. The
Yeah.
problem is the BRICS are not going to bend. And again, the BRICS aren't all powerful. But again, on the flip side, somebody in his administration should remind him that history rhymes. It doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. I'm not saying it's exactly like 1930, but when Hoover tried the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, exports out of the U.S. dropped by 30%. Senators Smoot and Hawley lost their seats, and Hoover went down as one of the worst presidents in history. It backfired. And studies out of Switzerland have shown that this tariff will actually be more detrimental to the U.S. than to the BRICS. You can debate that all day long. We're all going to have to wait and see. But I think it's not as simple as just carrying that big stick and making threats when you're talking about the BRICS.
Geopolitical tensions between the global south and the west have escalated in recent months, with former U.S. President Donald Trump threatening 100% tariffs on BRICS nations. Amid this standoff, China has reported a record trade surplus of $1 trillion, solidifying its role as a key economic powerhouse in the shifting global order. China's economic growth remains a defining factor in its rivalry with the United States. As BRICS nations push for financial independence from the dollar, China has strengthened its monetary position. With a reported 5% growth rate and a record U.S. goods trade deficit of $122 billion, China is emerging as a viable alternative to Western financial dominance. According to MatthewPiepenburg, the turning point came in 2022 when the U.S. weaponized the dollar against Russia by freezing its reserves. This move eroded trust in the dollar as a neutral reserve currency and accelerated BRICS de-dollarization efforts. India and Indonesia are settling trade in local currencies, signaling a growing shift away from dollar dependency. Trump's aggressive tariff threats highlight Washington's concern over BRICS' economic rise. The U.S. aims to counter China's dominance and reduce its reliance on foreign manufacturing. However, with BRICS nations strengthening their economic ties, the alliance presents an increasingly attractive alternative to Western-led financial systems. Let's get back to the interview.
Trump wouldn't be making this threat to the BRICS if he wasn't concerned, highly concerned about the BRICS. I don't want to say afraid, but I think he is afraid. Trump's being advised. You can't deny what's happening with the BRICS. And again, it's a longer discussion. And I don't want to just be anti-Trump, but the tariffs warned or threatened against the BRICS are just confirmation that the U.S. in general, not just Trump, is desperate and desperately concerned. That's the first thing. But I like to give two sides to every argument on the BRICS thing. I've been talking about the BRICS for years. I'm obviously in the camp that de-dollarization and the threat of the BRICS is real, very real. It's not overnight. It's not going to replace the U.S. dollar as world reserve currency. It's not going to destroy the dollar. It's not going to end the hegemony of the dollar in the sense, but it's certainly repricing and changing it. So it is a real force. It's almost half the population. It's 35% of global GDP. They have a huge amount of natural resources among them. There are many strengths in the BRICS that make them different than, say, Colombia, Mexico, or Canada with tariff threats. But I also want to, I don't want to just say that Trump is afraid and he's stupid and these tariffs and these threats are useless. They're not. And there's a reason for it. And, you know, when I look at the BRICS and the U.S. and the tariffs and Trump, there is the argument that Trump, it's like, who is the bigger sucker? Trump famously said, we're not going to be the sucker to the BRICS. We're not going to let them get away with de-dollarizing, moving away from the mighty dollar. And there's great political optics in that, and there's strength in that. He's like Teddy Roosevelt, but then some. Teddy Roosevelt said, speak softly and carry a big stick. Trump speaks loudly and carries a big stick. He has legitimate reasons for being angry at de-dollarization or moving away from the dollar. I mean, and I think one of the main reasons is he's seeing a massive offshoring of jobs, you know, and this is the irony and the contradiction of Trump. But he does, first of all, see a major moving away from the dollar and offshoring and cheaper labor. And the irony is he's got guys like the CEO of Apple at his inauguration or at Mar-a-Lago. When you look at Apple as an example, those iPhones are all made in China, like every other American dream is made in China. The head of Nike, billionaire, where does he make his shoes? Not in the U.S. John Deere, the great American tractor. I'm from the Midwest. That's Iowa. John Deere is Iowa. Where do they make their tractors? Mexico. Trump is legitimately upset that the American dream has been offshored. And so part of the reason he's making these tariff threats is to get CEOs that are in China or Mexico to get their butts back in the U.S. and make their tractors and iPhones in America. Who couldn't be for that? I'm for that. That's expensive, the reshoring. It's necessary. It's going to take more than 2 years. It's probably going to be inflationary. But for the long-term direction of America, it makes sense. So I get Trump's idea. These threats against the BRICS are partly to try and convince U.S. CEOs to come back into the U.S. Trump also sees a $300 billion trade deficit with the BRICS. He's legitimately upset about that. And finally, he sees a national security threat. in places like China making computer chips for weapons that we could possibly use in a cold or hot war against China. So we need to bring this back. He's making Teddy Roosevelt big stick threats against the BRICS, and you can't mock him for that. He does feel like the U.S. has been a sucker. But then you have to look at it from the BRICS side, because they also feel like a huge sucker. They've had generations of importing U.S. inflation through Fed policy. When the Fed makes the dollar weak or strong, rates up or down, the balance sheet fatter or smaller, that affects the local currencies and local policies of every other country in the world. They are, and the BRICS in particular, are the dog being wagged by the tail of the Fed. In addition, those BRICS countries have spent generations having the IMF and the World Bank give them loans with lots of strings attached that are very usurious. And there's a great book by John Perkins called Confessions of an Economic Hitman. Everyone should read that if they want to understand why the BRICS are sick of having the IMF or the World Bank give them generous loans. They're not generous. They're usurious and they're destructive. So they feel like the suckers from the IMF. They feel like suckers from the World Bank. They feel like suckers from the Fed. And most importantly, since 2022, when we weaponized a neutral reserve world currency against a major nuclear power, the R in BRICS, that they're going to react differently about the trustworthiness of this neutral reserve asset. So from the BRICS perspective, they're the suckers. From Trump's perspective, we're the suckers. And they're both right.
Global trade dynamics are profoundly transforming as economic alliances shift and financial strategies evolve. The increasing preference for local currency settlements and alternative trade mechanisms departs from long-standing monetary structures. With rising tariffs and shifting economic policies, the landscape is becoming more unpredictable, challenging traditional financial dominance. As nations reassess their economic strategies, one key question emerges. Will these changes lead to a more balanced global economy, or will they deepen existing divisions and fuel further economic fragmentation? Share your perspective in the comment section. If the video resonates with you, join our community by subscribing to our channel and enabling notifications with the bell icon. Thank you for being a part of our community.